"You cannot keep me here," the dragon child said, and the cargo hold rang with the voice of something far older than her body should have allowed. Ren Osiri set down the crate she'd been shouldering, 40 kilos of coolant canisters bound for upper docking, and turned toward the sound. She had worked the freight decks of Calanth Station for 11 years. She had heard bulkhead panels sing in thermal expansion, heard the deep belly groan of ships settling on their cradles. She had never heard a voice come from behind the number 6 pallet stack at 3 hours past the shift bell. The dragon was wedged between two shipping containers, scaled hide pressed against the cold steel. Young adolescent, maybe, though Ren was no expert. The creature's body was roughly the length of a supply dolly, from the tip of the blunt muzzle to the spaded tail pressed tight against the far wall. Her scales were a bruised twilight color, indigo bleeding into a deeper violet at the joints, and they were dull in a way that even Ren could tell was wrong. Wings folded tight against her flanks, pressed so close they might have been painted on. Claws retracted. Eyes large, vertically slit, the color of unpolished copper fixed on Ren with an expression that was not quite fear and not quite fury. It was closer to exhaustion, wearing the mask of defiance. "I heard you," Ren said. She kept her voice at the same level she used when speaking to dock supervisors who had not slept in 30 hours. Calm, even. "Nobody's keeping you anywhere. This is freight storage. You walked in on your own or somebody put you here. Which was it?" The dragon child's nostrils flared. One wing shifted a flinch, not a stretch, and Ren caught a glimpse of the membrane beneath. Torn. Not badly, not a gash that would ground a full-grown flyer, but enough to make the wing hang at a slight angle when it moved. "I am Tessevrin Cornall, 17th daughter of the Cornall Crest, and you will release me." "I'm Ren Osiri, freight loader, Dock 9 South. I don't have a crest, and I'm not holding you." She studied the space between the containers. The dragon child had dragged a packing blanket from somewhere and piled it beneath herself. There were marks on the floor, claw scratches in the anti-skid coating, frantic circles, as if the creature had paced and paced before finally collapsing. Near the blanket, a puddle of condensation from a leaking pipe had been lapped nearly dry. The dragon was drinking condensation off the floor. Ren turned her back deliberately, slowly, and walked 17 paces to the brake station at the hold's forward wall. She filled a clean container with water from the tap. Then she opened the cold store where the dock crew kept their lunches and pulled out the protein ration she'd packed for her own mid-shift meal. She carried both back and set them on the floor, 2 arm lengths from the dragon child's hiding place. Then she stepped back and sat on a coolant crate. "You looked thirsty," she said. Tessevrin's eyes tracked the water container. Her throat worked a dry, clicking sound, and the copper eyes flicked back to Ren. "This is a tactic. It's a cup of water and half a protein bar." Silence filled the hold. Somewhere overhead, the station's environmental system hummed its constant, tuneless note. A freight dolly whined past in the corridor outside. Ren counted to 60, then to 60 again, and she was halfway through a third count when the dragon child moved. She lunged for the water with none of the dignity her name had promised. Her claws scraped the container, nearly tipping it, and she drank in deep, shuddering pulls, her whole body curving around the vessel as if afraid someone would rip it away. When it was empty, she sat back on her haunches and stared at the protein bar, as if it might be a trap. "The bar's not great," Ren said. "Grain base compressed, probably tastes like engine grease to you, but there's calories in it." Tessevrin ate the bar in 2 bites, then she licked the wrapper. Ren refilled the water. The countdown had already begun, though Ren did not know it yet. 3 station days remained before the Cornall Crest searchers would arrive at Calanth in force, and in those 3 days, the shape of Ren Osiri's life would change completely. But that was later. Right now, she refilled the water and the dragon child drank, and neither of them spoke. The next 12 hours taught Ren 3 things about Tessevrin Cornall. First, The dragon child was terrified, and her terror expressed itself as command. Every sentence was an order: bring more water. This blanket is inadequate. You will not tell anyone I am here, delivered in a voice that cracked on every third word. Wren understood the mechanism. She had been 17 once, alone in a transit hub after her parents' freighter contract ended, and she remembered how much easier it was to give orders than to ask for help. Second, Tesseverin's wing was worse than it looked. The membrane tear was superficial, but the joint beneath was swollen, hot to the touch when Wren finally got close enough to see it. The dragon child had been holding the wing rigidly still to avoid the pain, and the muscles around the joint had locked into spasm. She needed a specialist, a draconic physiologist, at minimum, and Calanth Station's medical deck did not stock one. Third, someone had put her here, not Tesseverin herself. When Wren pressed gently between offerings of food and water, never pushing, always retreating when the copper eyes went hard, the story came in fragments. A delegation. The Cornall Crest traveling to a territorial summit at the Bellies conquered. Tesseverin brought along because her mother, the Crestmother, believed in showing the younger generation the mechanics of governance. Then a disagreement. Tesseverin did not explain the politics, only that it involved a rival lineage called the Droth and a corridor of space that both crests claimed. The Droth delegation had been waiting at Calanth when the Cornall ship docked, and Tesseverin, wandering the station's public tier while the adults argued, had been cornered by 3 Droth retainers in a service corridor. They had not hurt her badly. The wing injury was from the fall when she tried to flee down a maintenance shaft. But they had taken her communicator, her crest marker, a small disk of iridescent metal that she wore on a chain around her neck, and left her in the freight level with a warning. If the Cornall wanted their 17th daughter returned, the corridor claim would be settled in Droth's favor. A hostage, Wren said. I am not a hostage. I am a negotiating asset. You're sitting in a cargo hold drinking floor water and eating my lunch. That's a hostage. Tesseverin's tail struck the deck, a sharp crack of frustration that echoed off the container walls. Her claws extended, scraped steel, retracted. If my mother learns I was taken this easily, the shame she will think I am weak. She'll think you're 15 and outnumbered. I am 16. Even more so. Tesseverin's claws flexed against the deck plating. Among the Cornall, a daughter who is taken does not carry the shame. The shame falls on those who failed to protect her, but that is the law. The feeling is different. The feeling is always different from the law. You speak as though you know. Wren pulled a thread from the edge of the packing blanket. I was 13 when my parents' contract ended. Ship got sold. They got reassigned to a deep haul route that didn't allow dependence. Left me at a transit hub on Gareth Station with a bag and enough credit for 2 weeks of meals. They left you. They said they'd come back. The contract was supposed to be 8 months. How long was it? Wren didn't answer immediately. She folded the thread between her fingers, a small, habitual motion. They didn't come back. The contract extended, then extended again. After a year, the transit authority flagged me as unaccompanied and put me in the labor registry. I started hauling freight because I was big enough to lift a crate and nobody asked my age. The cargo hold was very quiet. Tesseverin's tail had gone still. You were a child, the dragon said. And no one came for you. No. And yet you came for me. Wren looked at her. The copper eyes were steady, and the defiance in them had shifted, not gone, but layered now with something else, something that recognized a shared geography of abandonment even across the vast distance between species. Maybe that's why, Wren said. There were 47 hours left on the countdown. Wren did not know the number, but she could feel the weight of it, something building, something coming in the way the station's upper tiers had gone quiet, in the way dock security was running extra patrols past the freight bays, in the muffled argument she'd overheard between two harbor officials about a draconic incident on the diplomatic tier. She did what she could. She reported to her shift supervisor that she'd found a stowaway in hold 6 technically true, and requested the bay be locked for maintenance. Breck, the supervisor, was a tired man who had learned long ago that Wren's requests were worth honoring. He looked at her for a moment the way supervisors look at employees who have never once caused trouble and are now, clearly, about to cause a great deal of it, and then nodded. "Maintenance lockout," he said. "I'll log it as a climate system irregularity. Should buy you 2 cycles before anyone asks questions." "That's enough." "Enough for what?" "I'll let you know." He locked the bay and assigned her to interior inventory for the next 2 cycles, which gave her a reason to stay. Wren appreciated Breck more in that moment than she had in the previous 11 years of working under him. He was the kind of man who understood that sometimes the right thing to do was to stop asking questions and hand someone a key. The first night was the hardest. Tess Everin would not eat anything Wren brought from the standard commissary stores. The grain bars were too dense. The reconstituted vegetables had a chemical taste that made the dragon child's nostrils flare in disgust, and the protein rations were, in Tess Everin's words, an insult to any species with functional taste receptors. Wren tried the smoked meat. That worked. She tried dried fruit. That worked better. She tried broth heated on the break station's element, and Tess Everin drank the entire flask in 3 long pulls and then held the empty container to her chest, as if it were the most valuable thing she had ever been given. "My mother makes a broth," Tess Everin said very quietly, "from the kelp that grows in the thermal pools on Severin. It tastes nothing like this, but the warmth is the same." Wren refilled the flask. She brought more food. Proper food this time: smoked meat from the commissary, dried fruit, a flask of broth that she heated on the break station's element. She brought a second blanket, then a third, and stacked them into something resembling a nest. She brought a tube of anti-inflammatory gel from the doc medical kit and spent 15 minutes explaining to a bristling dragon child that she was going to touch the injured wing, that it would hurt briefly, and that the gel would reduce the swelling. "You are not a healer. I've been loading freight for 11 years. I know what a swollen joint looks like on any species, and I know what anti-inflammatory does. And if you damage it further, then I'll have made it worse, and you can add it to the list of complaints you're building against me. But right now the joint is locking up, and if it stays locked another day, the muscles will start to atrophy." Tess Everin held perfectly still while Wren worked. Her scales were warm under Wren's hands, warmer than human skin, with a faint vibration beneath the surface that might have been a pulse or might have been something else entirely. The swelling was pronounced, the tissue beneath the scales tight and angry. Wren applied the gel with steady, unhurried fingers, working it into the joint with the same careful pressure she used when repacking bearing housings. The dragon child made a sound, low, involuntary, rising from somewhere deep in the chest, not a purr exactly, but a harmonic, a double-toned note that filled the hold like a tuning fork pressed against a hull plate. It lasted 3 seconds and then cut off, as if Tess Everin had caught herself. "What was that?" Wren asked. "Nothing." The copper eyes were fixed on the far wall. "It was nothing." 20 minutes later, the wing moved. Not much, a tentative extension, a careful fold, but the joint flexed where before it had been rigid, and Tess Everin's breath came out in a long, shaking exhale that sounded like relief wearing the disguise of annoyance. "Adequate," she said. "You're welcome." While the gel worked and the silence settled, Tess Everin began to talk. Not in orders for the first time. She spoke the way an adolescent speaks when the guardrails of rank and training have been stripped away, and there is nothing left but the raw architecture of a life still being built. She talked about the Cornall Crest's home territory, a chain of volcanic islands on a world called Severin, where the thermal currents ran hot enough to keep a dragon airborne for hours without a single wing beat. She talked about her sisters, 16 older, each with a function in the Crest's hierarchy, each carrying a frequency that harmonized with the others like instruments in an orchestra that had been tuning for generations. She was the 17th, the youngest by 40 years, born late and unexpected, and she had spent her entire adolescence trying to find the note she was supposed to carry. My mother says the note will come when I stop looking for it. Sounds like something a mother would say. She is usually right. It is irritating. Ren laughed, a short, surprised sound that she did not expect and could not take back. Tesseverin's head tilted, the copper eyes brightening. You have a good frequency when you laugh, the dragon child said. The hold catches it. The hold catches everything, bad acoustics. No, good acoustics, this place resonates. You chose well whether you know it or not. Ren considered the gray steel walls, the leaking pipe, the scratch marks on the floor. She had never thought of Hold 6 as a place she had chosen. It was a place she had been assigned, a space she passed through on her way to and from work, as unremarkable as a corridor or a lift. But Tesseverin was looking at it as if the walls were singing, and Ren wondered briefly if the dragon child could hear something she could not. 41 hours on the countdown. Ren slept on the floor of Hold 6 that night, her back against a container, her jacket folded under her head. She woke once to find Tesseverin watching her from the nest of blankets, the copper eyes luminous in the Hold's emergency lighting. You did not leave, the dragon child said. I told you I wouldn't. Humans say many things. This one keeps her word. A pause. Then Tesseverin's tail curled around her own body, a gesture Ren would later learn was the draconic equivalent of pulling a blanket to one's chin, and the copper eyes closed. When Ren woke again at the shift bell, the dragon child had moved in the night. Not far 3 meters, maybe, but the nest of blankets had been dragged closer to where Ren was sitting, and one corner of the topmost blanket had been pulled over Ren's legs. Ren looked at the blanket. She looked at the sleeping dragon. She said nothing, and she did not move the blanket. 36 hours. The next day brought the first complication. Ren was returning from the commissary with a thermal bag of food when she found a Droth retainer waiting outside Hold 6. He was taller than Ren by a head, with the elongated frame and pale-amber scales of the northern Droth lineage. His wings were folded in the formal lock position, and his crest marker hung prominently at his throat, a deliberate display of authority. This bay is sealed for maintenance, Ren said. I am sent Drothvel attaché to the Droth delegation. Open this bay. Maintenance lockout. Talk to the dock supervisor. I will talk to you. He stepped closer. Ren set the thermal bag on the floor and straightened to her full height, which put her eyes level with his sternum. A young Cornal female was last seen entering this section. The delegation has filed a concern for her welfare. Concern, that's one word for it. His eyes amber, slit-pupiled, cold, narrowed. You do not understand the politics at work here, human. The Cornal Crest's territorial claim is illegitimate, built on a survey error 3 generations old. The 17th daughter's temporary relocation was intended to facilitate a rational discussion. You cornered a 16-year-old, hurt her wing, took her communicator and dumped her in a freight bay to force a land deal. That's not politics. That's kidnapping. The Droth attaché was very still. You are a freight loader. Yes. This is not your concern. She's in my hold. That makes it my concern. He considered her for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, the Crestmother Cornal has been informed that her daughter is safe and will be returned when the corridor agreement is signed. The signing is expected within 2 station days. No harm will come to the child. Your intervention is unnecessary and, I must tell you plainly, unwise. She's drinking condensation off the floor and her wing joint is swelling shut. You call that safe? Something shifted in his expression, not guilt, exactly, but the discomfort of a bureaucrat confronted with specifics. I will arrange for provisions to be sent. Don't bother, I've got it. She picked up the thermal bag, keyed the maintenance override on the bay door, a code Breck had given her years ago for exactly these kinds of situations, and stepped inside. The door sealed behind her, and she stood in the dark for a moment, listening to her own heartbeat. The Droth would be back, or someone above him would. The countdown was real. 31 hours. She told Tesseverin about the encounter while the dragon child ate. Smoked meat again, and this time a packet of dried berries that Tesseverin consumed with an intensity that suggested berries were closer to a draconic diet than protein bars. The young dragon listened without interrupting, which was a first. He said the signing is expected within 2 days, Wren finished, which means your mother is being pressured, and you're the pressure. The corridor claim is legitimate. The survey was conducted by the Cornall's own cartographic line 200 years ago. The Droth have no basis. That may be true, but right now they have you, and truth doesn't negotiate as well as a hostage. Tesseverin's tail struck the deck again. I should have fought. When they cornered me in the service corridor, I should have. 3 full-grown retainers against 1 adolescent with half-spread wings in a narrow corridor. Fighting would have gotten you killed. Then I should have called for help. They took your communicator first. You told me that. Then I should have. The words died. Tesseverin's head dropped, and her wings, both of them, the injured one with a wince, sagged open like sails losing wind. It was the most vulnerable Wren had seen her. You should have been protected, Wren said. That was never your job. The harmonic came again. Deeper this time, longer, and Tesseverin did not cut it off. The sound filled the hold with a resonance that Wren felt in her sternum, in the bones of her hands, and she understood without being told that this was not a purr of contentment. It was something rower, the draconic equivalent of a child finally letting the cry come. Wren did not reach for her. She had learned in 3 cycles of careful proximity that Tesseverin would accept help offered at arm's length but flinched from contact that came too fast. So she sat where she was, and she let the sound fill the space between them, and she waited. After a long time, Tesseverin said, My crest marker, they took it. I know. It is not simply jewelry. It carries the crest's harmonic signature, a frequency that identifies a Cornall daughter to any member of the lineage within range. Without it, if my mother's searchers come, they will scan this station and they will not find me. I will register as ambient noise, an untagged juvenile. So you're invisible. I am nobody. The word hit Wren like a fist. She knew that word. She had worn it years ago in a transit hub that smelled like engine coolant and recycled air, waiting for someone to claim her, feeling the hours pass and the certainty grow that nobody was coming. She stood up. Where would they keep it, the crest marker? The Droth delegation has formal quarters on the diplomatic tier. Deck 14. It would be secured with their valuables. Deck 14 is 23 levels above us. Yes. And I'm a freight loader with a maintenance access card. Tesseverin looked at her. The copper eyes were wet, not tears, exactly, but a gloss of moisture that caught the emergency lighting and turned it to amber fire. You would do this. Wren picked up the thermal bag. There were 3 berries left in the bottom. She tipped them into her palm, set them on a clean cloth beside the nest, and stood. Stay here, keep the door sealed. If Synth or anyone else comes, you don't open it. I'll be back before the shift bell. Wren. She stopped at the door. Why? 11 years of freight work. 40,000 crates, 600-odd freighter cycles, 4 dock supervisors, 2 herniated discs, and a pension that would barely cover a room when she aged out of the labor pool. Nobody had ever asked her why she did anything, because nobody had ever expected her to do anything that mattered. "Because you asked," Wren said. 26 hours. The diplomatic tier was everything the freight decks were not: clean corridors, climate-controlled air, soft lighting that mimicked a planetary sunset. Wren had been up here exactly once in 11 years, delivering a mislabeled crate of ceremonial wine to the Thessian embassy. She had felt, then and now, like a work boot on a marble floor. She did not try to be clever, she did not sneak. She put on her cleanest dock uniform, the one without grease stains. The one she kept for annual reviews, clipped her loader's badge to her chest, and walked through the diplomatic tier carrying an empty equipment case, as if she had every right to be there. Nobody stopped her. Nobody ever stopped maintenance workers. That was the advantage of being invisible, the same invisibility that Tessavrin feared, and Wren had spent a career learning its uses. Deck 14, Section C, the Droth delegation's formal quarters were behind a sealed door with a biometric lock. Wren did not attempt the lock. Instead, she walked 30 meters past it to the environmental access panel, keyed it open with her maintenance card, and crawled into the ventilation trunk that served the section. The trunk was narrow, designed for inspection drones, not middle-aged dock workers, and Wren's shoulders scraped the walls on both sides. But she had spent years crawling through freight conduits to clear blockages, and her body knew how to move in tight spaces. She followed the trunk until she found the junction above the Droth quarters, popped the inspection cover, and looked down. The room was empty. The delegation was on the diplomatic tier's central hall, locked in negotiations that had been running since Tessavrin's disappearance. On a low table near the window, arranged on a cloth of dark fabric, she saw 3 items: a data pad, a communication relay, and a small disk of iridescent metal on a broken chain. The crest marker. Wren dropped through the vent. The ceiling was low enough that she only fell a meter, and she landed on her feet with a grunt that she hoped the soundproofing swallowed. She crossed the room, picked up the crest marker, and felt it buzz against her palm, a vibration, a frequency, like holding a small, warm heartbeat. She took the communicator too. She left the data pad. The return was harder. Pulling herself back up into the vent trunk required all 11 years of freight muscle, her arms shaking with the effort, her shoulders burning against the narrow walls. She hung for one bad moment with her legs dangling and her grip slipping on the inspection cover's lip, and she thought about what would happen if she fell. A dock worker found in a Droth delegation's quarters holding a stolen crest marker, with no explanation that anyone would believe. Then she pulled. One heave, then another, and she was through, belly down in the trunk, the inspection cover sealed behind her, the crest marker pressing against her chest through her uniform pocket with its warm, insistent hum. She crawled back to the environmental access panel. Her elbows were raw. Her knees ached. She was sweating in the recycled air of the ventilation system, and the sweat smelled like coolant and adrenaline and the faintly metallic tang of the crest marker's vibration. She dropped out of the panel, sealed it, straightened her uniform, and walked toward the lift. A Thessian attaché passed her in the corridor, tall, elegant, draped in ceremonial silks, and did not glance at her. A harbor security officer nodded as she passed. A cleaning drone whirred around her boots. Nobody saw her. Nobody ever saw her. She rode the lift down 23 levels, through the strata of Callant Station's hierarchy: diplomatic tier, commercial tier, residential tier, maintenance tier, freight level. And with each level the walls got rougher and the lighting got harder and the people got fewer, until she was walking the familiar corridor of Dock 9 South with the shift bell ringing and the hum of cargo loaders filling the air like a language she had spoken all her life. 22 hours. Tessavrin's reaction when Wren held out the crest marker was not what Wren expected. The dragon child did not snatch it. She did not cry. She stared at the disk in Wren's palm for a long moment, her copper eyes tracking the iridescent shimmer of its surface. And then she looked up at Wren's face with an expression that Wren could not read. You went into the Droth delegation's quarters. Through the vent, actually. You could have been caught. You could have been detained. The Droth are not gentle with trespassers. I'm a freight loader. If they caught me, I'd have told them I was checking the climate system. They'd have believed me because nobody expects a dock worker to have a reason. You risked yourself. I brought your voice back, that's all. Tessavrin took the crest marker. She held it in both claws carefully, the way one holds a flame in wind, and pressed it to her chest. The harmonic rose again, but this time it was different. Higher, cleaner, with overtones that multiplied and layered until the hold itself seemed to vibrate in sympathy, and Wren felt the sound not in her bones but in her throat, as if her own body were trying to answer. The marker carries the crest's frequency, Tessavrin said. When I activate it, every Cornall within range will know where I am. Then activate it. If I do, they will come. All of them. The Crestmother, the senior daughters, the escort fleet. They will come to this station, and they will not come quietly. Good. You do not understand. The Droth delegation will know you took this. They will know a human dock worker penetrated their quarters. There will be consequences. There are already consequences. You're sitting in a cargo hold with a torn wing, and 3 adults put you here to force a land deal. My consequences don't stack very high next to that. Tessavrin looked at her for a long time. Then she slipped the chain over her neck, the broken link repaired with a twist of packing wire that Wren had provided, and the crest marker settled against her scales, and the harmonic shifted again, rising, broadcasting, calling. It is done, Tessavrin said. 20 hours. They waited, but waiting, Wren discovered, was not the same as stillness. Tessavrin, with the crest marker humming against her scales, began to change. Not physically, though the color in her hide seemed richer, the dullness lifting as hydration and food worked through her system, but in the way she held herself. She sat straighter. Her good wing opened and closed in idle stretches, testing range. She asked Wren questions. Not orders this time, questions. How long have you worked this station? 11 years. Before that? Transit kid. Grew up on freighters. My parents ran cargo contracts until the routes dried up. I ended up here because the station was hiring loaders and I was old enough to carry a crate. You chose to stay. I chose to have a paycheck and a bunk. Staying is what happened after. Tessavrin's tail coiled and uncoiled, a thinking gesture. Wren was learning. Among the Cornall, a being who tends a space for many years is said to carry its frequency. The space becomes part of them. Do you carry this station's frequency? Wren looked around the hold. Steel walls. Anti-skid flooring. The condensation drip from the leaking pipe, steady as a metronome. The hum of the environmental system. The distant clang of the shift bell on Dock 7. Maybe, she said. I've never thought about it that way. The Crestmother would say you do. She says frequency is not mystical. It is attention accumulated. You attend to this place, therefore it attends to you. Wren filed that away, quietly, in the part of her mind where she kept the few things anyone had ever said to her that mattered. 18 hours. Wren went back to work. She had inventory to file, crates to shift, a dock supervisor to placate, and the first ripple of trouble reached her on the freight level. Marin, a fellow loader who worked the Dock 7 bays, caught Wren at the commissary. Security's been through Dock 9 twice this shift, asking about a maintenance lockout on Hold 6. Breck covered for you, but he's getting squeezed. Some attaché from the diplomatic tier is pushing for access. Santha. Didn't catch a name. Tall amber scales, walks like he owns the corridor. I'll handle it. Wren, Marin grabbed her arm. They're talking about a diplomatic incident. The harbor authority is involved. Whatever you've got in that hold, people are paying attention. It's just a maintenance issue. Maintenance issues don't bring diplomats to the freight level. Wren pulled free gently. Trust me. Marin looked at her, really looked, the way people do when they're deciding whether a friend is in trouble or causing it, and then nodded. Fine. But if you need backup, you call. Noted. She returned to the hold with food and found Tessavrin standing for the first time in 2 days. Not pacing, standing still, her good wing half extended, her injured wing tucked but no longer rigid. She was facing the narrow viewport, watching the darkness of space beyond the station's hull. They will be scanning, Tessavrin said without turning. My frequency is broadcasting. Any Cornall vessel within 3 light days will have locked onto it by now. And the Droth? The Droth will know I am broadcasting too. The crest marker's frequency is not encrypted, it is a beacon, not a secure channel. Senth will have reported the recovery to his delegation within the hour. So they know you have it back. They know I have it back, and they know someone gave it to me. The only question they are asking is whether to cut their losses or escalate. As if in answer, the comm panel by the bay door chimed. Wren crossed to it and hit the receiver. Breck's voice, tight with the careful calm of a man navigating between authorities. Wren, Harbor Security wants a formal inspection of Hold 6. I've delayed it twice, but the third request goes over my head to the port commandant. You've got maybe 6 hours before they override the lockout. Understood, 6 hours is enough. Enough for what? Trust me, Breck. A pause. She could hear him breathing, measuring. I've trusted you for a decade. Don't make me regret it. The channel closed. Wren turned to Tessavrin. 6 hours before they can force the door. The fleet will be here before then. You're sure? Tessavrin's copper eyes met hers. I am sure of very few things, Wren Ossery. The speed of my mother's anger is one of them. 16 hours, the waiting grew teeth. Wren used the time to tend to the wing again. The swelling had receded noticeably, the anti-inflammatory working as intended, and the joint moved with less resistance when she manipulated it. But the membrane tear still wept a thin, clear fluid that smelled faintly of copper, and the tissue around the edges was inflamed in a way that suggested the beginning of infection. This needs a proper healer, Wren said. I am aware. I mean soon, not when we get around to it soon. I mean today. The fleet carries a physiologist. She trained on the Cornall breeding grounds. She has tended wings older than this station. Then I'll add that to the list of reasons I'm glad they're coming. Wren cleaned the wound with sterile solution from the dock medical kit, the same kit she'd used 100 times on her own cuts and scrapes, and the occasional deep gash from a dropped crate. She worked carefully, swabbing the torn membrane with cotton pads, applying a thin layer of antiseptic that made Tessavrin hiss through her teeth. Sorry. Do not apologize. The pain is informative. It tells me the tissue is still alive. That's a very Cornall way of looking at it. My mother says pain is a frequency like any other. It broadcasts damage. A wise being listens. Wren wrapped the wing in clean gauze from the kit, taping it with the gentle pressure of someone who had learned, through years of packing fragile cargo, exactly how much force a thing could bear. When she finished, Tessavrin extended the wing slowly, carefully, and the wrapping held. The dragon child looked at the white gauze against her indigo scales and made a sound that was half laugh, half bark. I look absurd. You look like someone whose wing is being taken care of. That is the same thing from a Cornall perspective. 14 hours, the second Droth visit. This time it was not Senth. A female Droth, older, broader, her scales the deep amber of autumn glass, appeared at the corridor junction near Hold 6 accompanied by 2 station security officers. Ren met them at the turn. Ren Osiri. The Droth's voice was smoother than sense, more controlled. I am Valeth Droth Khan, Senior Diplomatic Counsel. I wish to speak with you about a matter of recovered property. The crest marker isn't your property. I refer to the communication relay that was also removed from our quarters. Ren had forgotten about the communicator. It was sitting in Tessavrin's nest. Unused, the dragon child had her crest marker and no interest in the Droth's equipment. You can have the relay back. I'll leave it at the corridor junction. I would prefer to collect it personally and to verify the condition of the Cornall miner. Her condition is improving, no thanks to you. Valeth's expression did not change. The political situation is more complex than you appreciate, Ms. Osiri. The Cornall Crest's territorial claim, if validated, would displace 3 Droth settlement colonies, 14,000 individuals. The method of leverage was regrettable. The stakes were not. 14,000 people don't justify kidnapping one child. You speak from a position of moral simplicity. I envy it. I speak from a position of standing between you and a locked door. You can take your relay. You don't get through the door. The security officers shifted. Valeth raised a hand, a gesture that stopped them, and studied Ren for a long moment with eyes that were calculating, and somewhere beneath the calculation, tired. The Cornall fleet has been detected on long-range sensors. They will arrive within 10 station hours. When they do, this matter passes beyond all our hands. Good, Ren said for the second time. That's been the plan. Valeth left. Ren retrieved the Droth communicator from the hold, wiped it clean and left it at the junction. Then she returned to the hold, sealed the door, and sat down on her crate. You are building enemies, Tessavrin observed. I'm a freight loader. I've been invisible for 11 years. Having enemies means someone finally noticed I'm here. The dragon child's tail curled the blanket pull gesture. That, she said quietly, is a very Cornall way of looking at it. 12 hours. Ren was in the hold when the station shook. Not an impact, a resonance, a vibration that passed through the structure like a chord struck on a vast instrument. Tessavrin's head came up, her injured wing extending fully for the first time in 3 days, and the copper eyes blazed. The Crestmother's ship, she said. The Cornall Vigil. She's entering the station's proximity. How many? The Vigil does not travel alone. Through the hold's narrow viewport, a slit of reinforced glass, meant for cargo verification, Ren saw them. 3 ships, then 7, then a formation that filled the viewport's frame and kept going. Draconic vessels, long, sinuous hulls with swept wings and iridescent plating, their prows shaped like the heads of ancient serpents, their running lights burning copper-gold against the station's exterior floods. They moved with the coordinated precision of a hunting pack, and they were enormous. That's not a diplomatic delegation, Ren said. No, Tessavrin said. There was something in her voice that Ren had not heard before, not pride exactly, but a kind of settled certainty, the sound of a child who knows that someone is coming. That is a mother who has been told where her daughter is. 8 hours. The station's diplomatic tier descended into controlled chaos. Ren heard fragments through the calm chatter that leaked into the freight channels. The Droth delegation was requesting an emergency departure clearance. The harbor authority was denying it. The Cornall Vigil had taken up a position directly above the station, blanketing Calanth in a scan field so dense that half the station's sensor grid had gone into overload. On the freight level, work stopped. Loaders stood at viewports and watched the draconic fleet hold its position with the patient stillness of a predator that had already caught its prey and was simply waiting for it to stop running. Breck found Ren at the hold's 6th door. That fleet is here for whatever's in your hold. Yes. How much trouble am I in? None. You locked a bay for maintenance at a loader's request. That's procedure. And the rest of it is between me and them. Breck was quiet for a moment. He was a man who had built a career on knowing when to look the other way, and he had a fine-tuned sense for when looking the other way was the right call. This was one of those times. "You need anything?" "I could use some berries from the commissary. The good ones from the imported stock." "The imported stock costs 4 times the standard." "I know." He brought the berries. He did not ask who they were for. Wren brought Tessevrin the berries and a clean cloth to rewrap her wing, and she sat on the floor beside the nest while the station buzzed around them. The dragon child ate slowly this time, not the desperate hunger of the first day, but the careful, deliberate eating of someone who wanted to remember the taste. "In the Cornall tradition," Tessevrin said, turning a berry between her claws, "food shared in a place of shelter is a covenant. Not a formal one, not like a treaty or a crest oath, but a covenant of presence. It means I was here, you were here, we ate together and the place remembers. This is a cargo hold. Covenants do not require beauty, they require truth." Wren took a berry from the container. She ate it. It was sweet and slightly tart, with a finish that lingered. "Then the hold remembers," she said. Tessevrin looked at her, and the expression on the draconic face was one that Wren would carry with her for years, not gratitude, not reverence, but recognition. The simple, unadorned recognition of one being seeing another completely, without need or agenda or the weight of what they might become to each other. Just seeing. "She will want to meet you," Tessevrin said. "Who?" "The Crestmother, my mother." "I'd rather not." "It is not optional. You recovered a crest marker. You sheltered a daughter of the Cornall crest. In our law, that creates an obligation, a bond of recognition." "I don't want recognition. I gave you water and a blanket." "You gave me back my name." 6 hours, Breck called again. "Wren, the port commandant has overridden the maintenance lockout on Hold 6. Security will be at the bay in 30 minutes to conduct an inspection. Tell them to bring a formal translator." "What?" "A diplomatic translator. Whatever's in that hold falls under interstellar diplomatic convention regarding the welfare of foreign miners on neutral stations. Article 9, Section 12. I looked it up." A long silence, then you looked it up. "I've had a lot of downtime between crate runs." "Wren, I don't know what you're doing, and I have a very strong feeling I shouldn't ask." "You shouldn't, but it's the right thing. That's all I can tell you." Another silence. "I'll pass the message." 30 minutes. "Thank you, Breck." When security arrived, 2 officers, a harbor authority inspector, and a bewildered diplomatic translator who had been pulled from her shift on the upper tier, Wren opened the door herself. She stepped aside and let them see. They saw a dragon child, adolescent, indigo-scaled, sitting upright in a nest of packing blankets with her injured wing wrapped in clean gauze and her crest marker humming at her throat. They saw a cargo hold that had been converted, with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood materials and space, into a shelter blanket stacked for warmth, water containers arranged for easy access, food wrappers sorted and bagged in a dock recycler, the floor swept clean of everything except the fading claw marks. They saw Tessevrin Cornall look at them with copper eyes that held no fear and say, in perfectly clear standard dialect, "I am the 17th daughter of the Cornall crest, and I am under the protection of Wren Ossery, freight loader, Dock 9 South. You may verify my identity through my crest marker's frequency, which is currently broadcasting on the Cornall diplomatic channel." The translator did not need to translate. The harbor inspector looked at Wren. Wren looked back. "She's been here for 3 days, Wren said. Droth retainers cornered her, injured her wing, took her communicator and crest marker, and left her in this hold as leverage in a territorial dispute. I found her drinking condensation off the floor. I gave her water, food, and medical care. I recovered her crest marker from the Droth delegation's quarters. She activated her beacon. Her mother's fleet is currently parked above this station. The inspector opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Is there a report? There will be. They left. They did not attempt to move Tessavrin. They did not attempt to revoke Wren's access to the hold. Somewhere in the chain of command, someone had calculated the political arithmetic of removing a Cornall daughter from the care of the human who had sheltered her, while a Cornall battle fleet orbited overhead, and the calculation had come back with a number too large to touch. 4 hours. The Droth delegation broke. Wren learned this not from any official announcement, but from the sound of the bay doors on Deck 14 cycling, open in rapid sequence. The Droth clearing their quarters, packing their valuables, moving with the urgency of people who had realized that the political leverage they were holding had just evaporated. Senth Drothvel came to hold 6 one last time. Wren was waiting outside the door. The corridor agreement will not be signed, he said. His voice was flat, stripped of its earlier composure. No. You have made a powerful enemy in the Droth Crest. And you kidnapped a 16-year-old to win a land dispute. I think my choices sit better. He studied her. For one moment, the mask of the diplomat slipped, and what was underneath was not anger but bewilderment, the genuine confusion of someone who could not understand why a freight loader with nothing to gain had chosen to stand in the way. What did she offer you? A cup of water, Wren said. I offered it first. He left. Wren watched him go, and she felt nothing in particular, no triumph, no satisfaction, just the steady tick of a countdown reaching its final hours. 2 hours. Wren sat on the floor of Hold 6 and watched Tessavrin sleep. The dragon child had curled into the nest of blankets with her good wing draped over her body and her injured wing still wrapped in Wren's gauze, still warm to the touch tucked carefully beneath. Her breathing had settled into a rhythm that Wren could feel through the deck plating, slow and deep, the exhale carrying a faint harmonic undertone that made the water containers resonate. She was beautiful in sleep. Wren had not thought of her that way before. The first 3 days had been too urgent for aesthetics, but in the dim emergency lighting of Hold 6, with the Cornall fleet holding position overhead, and the station's corridors emptying as non-essential personnel were directed to secure areas, Tessavrin looked like what she was. A young dragon, scaled and winged and clawed, ancient in lineage and terribly young in fact, and she had fallen asleep because she trusted the woman sitting beside her. That trust was the heaviest thing Wren had ever carried. Heavier than a 40-kilo crate, heavier than the 11 years of freight work that had built calluses on her palms and a permanent ache in her lower back. It sat in her chest, warm and steady, and she understood that this was what the Crestmother's claw touch had meant, and what Tessavrin's bond of shelter words would formalize. Not gratitude, not debt, not even obligation. Just the simple, irreducible fact that Wren had been trusted, fully and without reservation, by a creature whose instincts should have told her to trust no one. The scale that she would find later on the floor, the one that would end up in her breast pocket, warm and permanent, was not a gift. It was a record. The physical evidence that something had happened in this hold that could not be filed, inventoried, or loaded onto a freight dolly. 1 hour. Tessavrin woke when the first harmonic from the Cornall boarding party reached the freight level. She woke the way Wren had seen young things wake all her life, instantly, completely, the copper eyes snapping open with the clarity of something that has been listening even in sleep. They're here, Tessavrin said. I know. Wren, when my mother comes through that door, she will see a human dock worker who is sitting on the floor of a cargo hold with her daughter's blankets piled around her. She will see the gauze on my wing. She will see the food wrappers and the water containers. She will see the claw marks on the floor from the first night, and the boot prints from your patrols, and the protein bar wrapper that I licked clean because I was hungrier than I have ever been in my life. Yes, she will see all of that and she will understand it, but I want her to understand something else too. What? Tessevrin sat up. Her scales caught the emergency lighting and threw it back in fractured indigo, and for one moment she looked not like an adolescent but like the shadow of the dragon she would become, the 17th daughter, the one who had been lost and found, the one who would carry the memory of a cargo hold and a cup of water into whatever centuries the Cornwall crest still held ahead of them. I want her to understand that you did not do this because I am the 17th daughter. You did this because I was thirsty. That's what I'll tell her. I know, that is why she will believe you. They came for Tessevrin in the last hour. Not the Crestmother herself, not yet. First came 2 senior daughters of the Cornwall crest, tall and broad-winged, their scales the deep indigo that Tessevrin's would darken into with age. They wore formal crest markers that sang with the same frequency as Tessevrin's, and when they entered the hold, the harmonics multiplied, layering into a chord that made Wren's teeth ache. They spoke to Tessevrin in a language Wren did not understand, rapid, resonant, full of frequencies that dipped below human hearing and rose above it. But the gestures were clear enough. They checked the wing, clicking their tongues at the swelling. They examined the nest, the stacked blankets, the careful arrangement of food wrappers and water containers, and one of them turned to look at Wren with an expression that Wren would later learn was formal astonishment. A draconic noble's nest, built by a freight loader's hands, from packing blankets and a leaky pipe. Tessevrin spoke. She pointed at Wren. She spoke again, longer this time, and the harmonics in her voice rose and fell in patterns that sounded like a formal recitation. The 2 senior daughters listened without moving, their eyes shifting between Tessevrin and Wren, and when Tessevrin finished, they turned to Wren and lowered their heads. Not a bow. A dipped chin to chest, wings shifting slightly open. A gesture of acknowledgement that carried in the draconic vocabulary of posture the weight of a spoken oath. They wish to thank you, Tessevrin said. Her voice was steady now, the cracking gone. But the word they used is not thank. The closest translation is it means we recognize a debt that is not owed but will be honored. That's a lot of words for thank you. We are not an efficient species when it comes to gratitude. 1 hour. The Crestmother came last. She filled the hold. Not physically, she was no larger than the senior daughters, though her scales were the darkest indigo Wren had ever seen, so deep they were nearly black, shot through with veins of copper gold that pulsed with a faint bioluminescence. But her presence, the weight of her, the harmonic that preceded her like a bow wave pressed against the walls of hold 6 as if the room had shrunk. She wore no formal dress. She wore no crest marker at her throat because, Wren would learn later, the Crestmother's frequency was carried in her body, woven into her scales, broadcast from the marrow of her bones. She was the crest, in a way that the marker only symbolized. She looked at her daughter. She crossed the hold in 3 strides, not fast, not slow, with the measured precision of a being who had been moving through spaces for 4 centuries and knew exactly how much power each step contained, and she touched Tessevrin's wing, the wrapped one. Her claw traced the line of gauze, testing the tension, reading the care that had been applied to the wrapping. She checked the joint. She checked the membrane beneath the gauze, lifting one corner with a gentleness that should not have been possible from claws that size. Then she looked at the nest. She looked at the empty water containers, 3 of them, lined up beside the blankets, each one rinsed and refilled and rinsed again over 3 days. She looked at the protein bar wrappers, the berry husks, the flask of broth that Tessevrin had kept long after the broth was gone. She looked at the tube of anti-inflammatory gel, half used, its cap off, set within easy reach of the nest. She looked at the claw marks on the floor, the frantic circles from the first night, the shorter pacing lines from later, and then the smooth area near the nest where Wren had swept the floor clean, and she read the chronology of fear becoming trust. She looked at the path worn between the nest and the door, where Wren's boots had tracked the same route a dozen times in 3 days, and she followed it with her eyes to the break station where the water tap dripped, and from there to the cold store where the dock crew's lunches were kept, and from there back to the nest. Then she looked at Wren. The Crestmother's eyes were not copper. They were gold, deep, ancient, layered gold, like light filtered through amber that had been forming since before human memory. They held Wren for a long moment, and Wren did not look away, because she had spent 11 years meeting the eyes of dock supervisors and harbor masters and customs officials, and she had learned that the only people who looked away were the ones who had something to hide. She had nothing to hide. She had given a frightened child water and food and shelter. She had crawled through a ventilation shaft to recover a stolen voice. She had slept on a cargo hold floor because she had said she would stay, and she kept her word. The Crestmother spoke, one sentence in the draconic language, and the harmonics of it were so deep that Wren felt them in the soles of her feet, rising through the deck plating like an earthquake's whisper. She says, Tessavrin translated, and her own voice had gone very quiet, that in 400 years she has known 3 beings who sheltered a Cornall daughter without asking what they would receive. 2 were dragons. The 3rd is standing in this room. Wren looked at the Crestmother. I didn't do it for recognition. Tessavrin translated. The Crestmother replied, and this time her voice was softer, the harmonics gentler, and there was something in her expression that cut through species and language, and the vast, cold distance between a freight loader and a draconic sovereign. She says that is why the recognition is given. The Crestmother extended one claw slowly, precisely, the way one offers an open hand, and touched the center of Wren's chest. Just the tip of the claw resting against the fabric of her dock uniform above the sternum. The touch lasted 3 seconds. Wren felt the harmonic pass through the claw, through the fabric, through her skin, and settle somewhere behind her ribs like a second heartbeat that had always been there, and had only now been given permission to beat. The Crestmother withdrew. She turned to her daughter. She opened her wings the full span, filling the hold from container to container, dark indigo membrane veined with copper gold, and Tessavrin stepped into the shelter of them. And for one moment the dragon child was simply a child, folded into her mother's warmth. The defiance and the fear and the hunger all burned away by the simple, ferocious fact of being held. Then the Crestmother folded her wings, and the 2 of them moved toward the door, and the senior daughters fell into formation behind them. Tessavrin stopped at the threshold. She turned back to Wren. The copper eyes were clear now, and bright, and the bruised indigo of her scales seemed to have deepened, as if 3 days of food and water and an anti-inflammatory gel had given her body permission to grow. Wren Ossery, she said, freight loader Dock 9 South. That's me. The Cornall Crest does not forget. This is not a courtesy. It is a law older than the territory the Droth tried to steal. Where you walk, the Crest walks beside you. Where you are threatened, the Crest answers. This is the bond of shelter, and it does not expire. That sounds like a lot of trouble for a cup of water. Tessavrin's mouth did something that Wren had never seen a draconic face do. The corners pulled back, the scales around the jaw shifting, and the nostrils flared in a soft exhale. It took Wren a moment to realize it was a smile. It was never about the water, the dragon said. And then she walked through the door, into the corridor, into the formation of her crest, and the hold emptied like a lung exhaling. Wren stood in the silence. The blankets were still warm. The berry container was still on the floor, 3 berries left at the bottom. The anti-inflammatory tube lay beside the nest, its cap off, half used. The condensation from the leaking pipe had started its slow accumulation again, pooling in the low spot where Tessavrin had lapped it dry 3 days ago. The harmonic lingered. Not in the air. Wren understood dimly that what she was feeling was not a sound at all but a frequency, a resonance that the Crestmother's claw touch had opened in her like a door being unlocked from the inside. It was warm. It was steady. It hummed in time with her heartbeat, and it did not fade. She picked up the blankets. She folded them dockworker neat, corners squared, edges aligned, and stacked them on the crate where Tessavrin had first seen her sitting. She collected the water containers, the protein bar wrappers, the gauze trimmings, and she sorted them into the recycler by the break station. She swept the floor. She wiped down the surfaces. It took 20 minutes. When she finished, Hold 6 looked like any other cargo bay on Callanth Station's steel walls, anti-skid floor, environmental system humming its tuneless note. Nothing to indicate that anything had happened here. Except the claw marks. Wren looked at them, the frantic circles from the first night, and then the shorter, calmer lines from later, the pacing of a creature that was still afraid but no longer alone, and she decided not to clean them. Let the floor remember. 0. The countdown ended at 3 in the morning, station time. The Cornwall fleet withdrew in a formation so precise that Callanth's traffic controllers would talk about it for years. 31 vessels, ranging from escort pinnaces to the Vigil herself, peeling away from the station in a synchronized arc that looked, from the viewport of Hold 6, like a flock of enormous birds wheeling into a dawn that did not exist in space. The Droth delegation departed on an emergency shuttle 2 hours later. The corridor dispute was settled 3 weeks after that in the Cornwall's favor by a tribunal that cited, among other evidence, testimony from a Callanth Station dock worker regarding the forcible detention of a minor. The testimony ran 47 minutes. Wren spoke plainly. She described the condensation on the floor, the swollen wing joint, the broken crest marker chain, the protein bar. The tribunal members, 2 draconic arbiters and 1 human justice, listened without interrupting. When she finished, the senior arbiter, a gray-scaled elder whose eyes had seen 2 centuries of territorial disputes, said simply, "This is sufficient." The Droth colonies were not displaced. The tribunal's ruling included a provision for resettlement support, funded by the Cornwall Crest. Tessavrin would tell Wren this later, in a message sent through official channels, and the wording carried the careful precision of a young dragon who was learning that politics did not have to be a weapon. Wren went back to work the next day. She loaded crates. She filed inventory. She ate her protein bar at the break station and drank water from the same tap she'd filled for Tessavrin. Breck said nothing to her when she arrived for her shift. He handed her the manifest, nodded once, and walked away. But the manifest was for the day shift, the one she'd been requesting for a decade, and the schedule on the wall showed her name inked in permanent marker where it had never been before. Marin found her at the commissary during the first break. "So," she said, sliding a cup of tea across the table. "I heard the diplomatic tier had a bad week. It wasn't great for them. And I heard a freight loader crawled through a ventilation shaft to recover stolen property from a foreign delegation's quarters." "That sounds irresponsible." "That sounds like you." Marin paused. "There's a scale on your locker door. Indigo, somebody put it there." "I know whose it is." "The whole dock knows whose it is, Wren. Half the station knows. You sheltered a Cornwall daughter in a cargo hold for 3 days and then stared down their rivals like it was a Tuesday." "It was a Wednesday, actually." Marin laughed. It was the first time anyone had laughed with Wren in longer than she could remember. 3 things were different. First, her maintenance card now opened every door on Callanth Station. Every door, including Deck 14. Nobody had reprogrammed it, or if they had, no administrator could find the change in the system logs. Second, Breck, her supervisor, received a formal communication from the Cornwall Crest's administrative office requesting that Wren Ossery be afforded the courtesies extended to a recognized friend of the Crest. Breck, who had survived 30 years of dock work by not asking questions he didn't want answered, simply nodded and started scheduling Wren for the day shift she'd been requesting for a decade. Third, on the floor of Hold 6 where Tess Everin had slept, there was a scale. One scale small enough to sit in Wren's palm, indigo at the center bleeding to violet at the edges, warm to the touch. It did not cool. It did not stop being warm. Wren picked it up and put it in her breast pocket, where it sat against her chest like a coin, or a crest marker, or a promise that had been made in a language older than words, and kept in the only currency that mattered. The hold was quiet. The shift bell rang. Wren Ossery, freight loader, Dock 9 South, stood in the space where she had been seen, and she went back to work. 6 weeks after the fleet withdrew, a package arrived at Dock 9 South addressed to Wren Ossery. It contained a cloth-wrapped bundle of dried berries, the good kind, the imported kind, the kind Breck had bought from the commissary's premium stock, and a note written in standard dialect with the careful, slightly formal phrasing of a young dragon learning to write in a language that was not her own. These are from the thermal gardens on Severin. They are better than the commissary stock. Do not argue. TKN. Wren ate one at the brake station. It was better than the commissary stock. She did not argue. The messages continued. One every few days, sometimes a note, sometimes a data file with an image attached. The thermal pools of Severin, the volcanic chain where the Cornall crest had roosted for 200 generations, a sunset over the breeding grounds that looked like the sky, was on fire. Tess Everin's writing grew less formal as the weeks passed, the 17th daughter's voice emerging through the diplomatic language like a young plant pushing through formal pavement. The physiologist says the wing will take another month to fully heal. She says the gauze work was remarkably competent for a non-specialist. I told her you load freight for a living, and she made a sound I have not heard a Cornall make before. I believe it was impressed. My mother asked me to describe the hold. I told her about the leaking pipe and the anti-skid coating and the freight dollies. She said it sounded like a nesting ground. I told her it was better than a nesting ground because it had a wren in it. I found my note, the frequency I was looking for. It came to me in the middle of a council session of all places. It sounds like a hold humming. I think you would recognize it. Wren kept every message. She filed them in the personal storage compartment of her locker, between her second pair of dock boots and the emergency ration kit she had never needed. And some evenings after the shift bell, she would read one while drinking tea from the commissary and feel the warmth of the scale in her breast pocket pulse in time with her heartbeat. 2 months after the fleet withdrew, a Cornall diplomatic cruiser docked at Callan Station without prior clearance. Harbor Authority panicked. Security scrambled. Wren looked up from a manifest she was checking and saw, walking down the ramp into the bright floodlit docking bay, a young dragon whose scales had darkened from bruised indigo to the deep, lustrous violet of a star field before dawn. Her wings were open, both of them. The joint moved cleanly, without pain. Tess Everin Cornall, 17th daughter of the Cornall crest, walked across the docking bay with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows exactly where she is going, past the scrambling security officers and the harbor officials and the confused customs agents, and stopped in front of Wren Ossery. She was carrying a container. She held it out. Wren looked inside. Berries, dried, the same kind she'd given Tess Everin in the hold. I brought provisions, Tess Everin said. Wren took a berry. It was sweet. Around them, the station continued its eternal hum, and the freight crates waited, and the daylight from the bay's open doors fell on 2 figures, one human, one draconic, standing in a docking bay where nothing of particular importance had happened, except that a dock worker had given a cup of water to a frightened child, and a frightened child had grown into someone who remembered. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no ceremony, no kneeling, no oath sworn in fire or song. There was only a container of berries and the quiet knowledge, shared between 2 beings who had sat together in the dark, that the trust between them was not a transaction, not a debt, not a diplomatic instrument. It was simply real, and it held.